Switching gears here, what do you think are some of the most challenging issues facing the CID industry?
Well, the industry, because it's driven by volunteers, finding volunteers willing to give their time to serve on boards of directors has been challenging. And associations have struggled with trying to get people to do that because the burden on those volunteers continues to grow annually as more and more legislation comes out and adding more restrictions and imposing greater burdens on these boards of directors. And that is, as members look at the potential liability, insurance issues, which you're familiar with, they're concerned about exposure to liability, as well as just the general workload involved in with the association. And so that has probably been the most difficult, the most challenging for associations is finding directors. Probably the next is the maintenance
Well,
issues.
before we move on from that, do you have a recommendation for your clients as far as how to get more people involved?
Well, the recommendation I have is to maybe close the legislature for 10 years. That would help a lot. But trying to induce members, their associations have different ways of trying to do that, talking to their neighbors, getting them to volunteer their time to come onto the board, sending out pleas. But beyond that, there really isn't any easy way to get people involved. Although one had a solution that was to announce that they were raising the dues by 20%. And suddenly a lot of people were interested in serving on the board.
Wait, what? The threat of financial peril.
Yes.
It always works. An attorney's best friend for sure.
The other thing that is challenging for associations is that California tends to be a bit litigious. And so associations are attractive targets because they're deep pockets. And so anytime anything happens, members think that the association is automatically liable and should be sued, and that they can somehow cure all of their problems by suing the association. And so that's one of the unfortunate sides of our practice, is that we do have a fair amount of litigation that we deal with in working with associations and dealing with insurance appointed counsel and dealing with the interpretation of governing documents and how they interplay with insurance. And, there's just a lot of complications because there's not any uniformity in the governing documents. And in fact, the master sets, our templates that we maintain, we're updating them on a regular basis. And so from year to year to year, we're constantly updating and updating because of all the changes in the law.
New bills being passed,
New bills,
etc.
right? And even with insurance issues, insurance is much a mystery to most people, and including a lot of attorneys who try to read policies and are just lost in all of the text and what's covered and what's not covered. So, of course, there are whole specialties in insurance coverage counsel that deal with these kinds of issues. So that's a major problem, dealing with litigation, and then dealing with probably the third, just trying to keep up with regular maintenance on buildings and reserve issues and making sure they've got enough money without offending their neighbors that they're raising their dues. And so it's a constant struggle between, do we raise the dues or not raise the dues? Do we special assess, not special assess? Do we increase our funding for reserves? And of course, if they decide that the kindest thing to do is to never raise dues, what happens is eventually they get hit with huge special assessments because they're dramatically under reserved and they don't have enough for operations. And so it turns out that regular small increases to deal with cost of living increases are much more
palatable
and easier for people to absorb than going for 10, 15 years with no increases and then getting hit with large increases and special assessments.